Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. And because of many of you requesting yesterday after our look at the Battle of Rorke's Drift, we have decided to take a look at the battle that happened just before that, just hours before that, the Battle of Isandlwana, which was happening nearby and about the same time and kind of led into the Battle of Rorke's Drift. So, this is part of the Anglo-Zulu Wars. We're January 1879. This is a channel I've never done a reaction to before. It's called History Radar. So definitely check them out. I will put the link in the description so you can check out not only this video with the original content without my commentary, but everything else that he has to offer. I haven't seen this yet, so let's see what it's all about. Oh man, that's a brutal quote to start with. I like it. Getting some movie clips from the movie.
January the 22nd, 1879, the mighty British Army suffers its worst defeat at the hands of a native force at the Battle of Isandlwana. But how did an army armed with just spears and shields slaughter such a modern army?
So, he's largely correct, armed with just spears and shields, but as we talked yesterday about the Battle of Rorke's Drift, by this point, just as was true in the American West, you do have the Zulu army armed with a lot of more modern weapons. I say more modern because they weren't as modern as what the British had. I think the British probably had breech-loading rifles by this point, ones that load from the rear, so it's a lot faster. A lot of the natives are probably, I shouldn't say Zulu warriors are armed with older firearms, but they do have some firearms.
This is the story of the Battle of Isandlwana. By the 1870s, the British Empire had gained a foothold in South Africa. However, to unify the whole of South Africa and absorb it into the British Empire, the independent kingdom of Zululand, which bordered on Natal, had to be suppressed.
So I mentioned this briefly in my short from yesterday, but 1867, the Federation of Canada is born. This is kind of the first big step toward Canadian kind of self-governance under kind of the auspices of the British Empire. And so the Lord Carnarvon, who was at that time in 1867 the British Secretary for the Colonies, felt that the same process could be used in South Africa. And in that process, they wanted to unite all of these separate territories under one federation. And that's what kind of leads into what becomes the Anglo-Zulu War.
Using any excuse to do so, British colonial officials and the Commander-in-Chief in South Africa, Lord Chelmsford, claimed that the Zulu Kingdom and the vast armies the Zulu King Cetshwayo had raised was a serious threat to the British colony of Natal, which it shared a border with along the famed Buffalo River.
So, like a lot of times in history, if you need a good excuse to go to war to be able to gain some territory and conquer an enemy, you can probably find one. The Americans used the USS Maine as a pretext to go to war with the Spanish. Germany, 1939, claimed that Poland struck first, and they were just responding, which is why they had to invade Poland, things like that.
As a result, on the 11th of December 1878, the British authorities delivered an ultimatum to King Cetshwayo on the banks of the Thukela River with outrageous terms which included the disbanding of the main Zulu army. Along with the outrageous terms, Cetshwayo was given a 20-day window in which to comply. Despite wanting to avoid a war at all costs with the British, Cetshwayo realized war was inevitable. Therefore, he ordered his armies to only defend their country and to not carry out war beyond the Zulu border for fear of being seen as an aggressor. The British, in absence of a satisfactory response to their ultimatum, invaded Zululand on January the 11th, 1879.
So a lot of parallels here, even let's say World War One, giving an ultimatum to the Serbians, knowing that they wouldn't comply with all 10 parts of it, giving the Austro-Hungarians a pretext to declare war. British get exactly what they want. They give terms they know won't be accepted, and now they can maybe try to sell it to the world as, hey, we gave them a chance. Now we're just protecting ourselves.
The British invasion was split into 3 columns, with the centre column led by Colonel Glynn of the 24th Regiment of Foot, accompanied by Lord Chelmsford himself. The British centre consisted of both battalions of the 24th Regiment of Foot, units of the Natal Native Infantry, Natal Irregular Horse, and the Royal Artillery, consisting of a total of around 4,700 men.
One of the things that's really cool in hearing some of these names, like the 24th Regiment of Foot, which today is known as the South Wales Borderers, I think at that time it was like the Warwickshire Regiment, something like that, is that there's such this incredible storied history that you can go back to things like the Revolutionary War, the U.S. Revolutionary War, and you can see some of these same units involved. And then you can see them involved in the Boer War and the Anglo-Zulu War, and you can see them involved in World War I and World War II. Same units, this history that goes throughout all of them.
On the morning of January 11th, 1879, the centre column of the British Army, in full spirit and full of vigour, marched into Zululand across the Buffalo River at Rorke's Drift. The British plan was to advance east and link up with the British right column, led by Colonel Pearson, before driving on Ulundi and taking on the Zulu army head-on in a decisive engagement.
Which is a great idea if the Zulu army is where you expect him to be, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy. And in this case, you're underestimating your enemy. And I think part of this, I don't fully understand because I don't know a lot about the details of what leads up to Isandlwana. But I think the British underestimated how quickly the Zulu army can move on foot because they aren't encumbered by supplies and artillery and, wagons, all these sorts of things that slow down a large army moving.
However, the difficult, hilly scrub terrain within Zululand and the heavy rains of the African summer made the wagon trails almost impassable, greatly slowing the centre column's advance. By January 20th, 1879, the column had only advanced as far as the mountain of Isandlwana. Weary from their difficult and slow march, Lord Chelmsford ordered the centre column to encamp on its lowest slopes. The next day, January 21st, a British mounted reconnaissance force under the command of Major Dartnell encountered a large Zulu force on the road to Ulundi in the direction of the King's Kraal. Excited by the opportunity of an early engagement, Chelmsford foolishly divides his force and orders the main bulk of the centre column, consisting of the 2nd Battalion 24th Regiment of Foot, the mounted infantry, and 4 guns, to move against the Zulu force at first light on...
Oh my gosh, the echoes of 1876, which are just 3 years, not even 3 years before this, with George Armstrong Custer at Little Bighorn. Oh my goodness. Same thing. You've got a small cavalry force at Little Bighorn, about 700 men under Custer. He encounters a much larger native population and divides his force in the face of a superior enemy. And part of that force, the part directly under him, gets wiped out. Oh, man.
On the 22nd. Little did he know Lord Chelmsford had made a tactical decision which would confine the remaining force at Isandlwana to its impending doom. At first light on the 22nd, Chelmsford and his force advanced east, leaving the camp lightly defended and under the command of Colonel Pauline, with Colonel Durnford bringing up No. 2 column in support of the camp. The remaining force consisted of 5 companies of the 1st Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot, 1 company of the 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot, 1 company of Mounted Volunteers and Natal Police, 2 companies of the Natal Native Infantry, and 2 7-pounder guns and 70 men of the Royal Artillery, totaling around some 1,700 men, officers and other ranks. At 10:30 a.m, Chelmsford's force linked up with Dartnell's reconnaissance unit on the road to Ulundi.
So, just as an aside, completely unrelated to the content of the video, I just want to say, this being my first time seeing this channel, he's done a really good job of his narration mixed in with clips from the movie, mixed in with his own maps showing things. This is really well done.
Only to discover, to their surprise, that the Zulu impi was nowhere to be found. Without realizing, the Zulu impi had slipped away during the night and bypassed Chelmsford's force to link up with the main Zulu army now advancing on the hopelessly exposed camp at Isandlwana.
Underestimated. Got fooled, got beat.
At 11 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd, mounted troops from the camp pursued a small party of Zulus north of the camp, eventually pursuing the party into a fold in the hills. To their absolute horror, the mounted troops stumbled upon the entire Zulu army, consisting of some 20,000 warriors resting in the fold.
Could you imagine in that moment what that must have felt like? And there was a moment where something similar probably happened a few years earlier at Little Bighorn. In fact, in the movie Son of the Morning Star, which is obviously portraying that, and we don't know because no one survived under Custer's direct command after he split his force. We don't know exactly what happened. We can piece it together. But there's a scene where Custer is going around and he thinks he's attacking the village from the other side. And Gary Cole playing Custer says, "This isn't the end of the village. This is the middle." And there's that moment of realization where he knows he's in trouble. And I think that's that moment for these guys here.
Realizing they had been spotted, the Zulu army leapt into action and hastily began forming into their attack formation.
And this is a really cool scene from the movie, which is a phenomenal movie, by the way. Both Zulu and Zulu Dawn are fantastic. They portray Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift. But the time in the 60s and 70s when they were making a lot of these movies, and it was pretty much all practical effects, and so you had to actually have thousands of men portraying Zulu warriors on the field, and just that moment where they come over and they see the force and then they get recognized, and at once they all start charging toward you. What a horrifying realization.
And advancing in the direction of the camp. The Zulu battle formation was known as the Horns of the Buffalo, which consisted of the head, horns and loins. The strategy was for the head and loins to deliver the initial frontal assault, drawing in the enemy, while the horns completed a flanking attack, eventually encircling the enemy and overwhelming them. As a mounted troop warned the camp of the attack, Colonel Pauline quickly dispersed all companies into an extended firing line away from the camp to meet the Zulu assault head-on and check it with superior firepower. East of the camp, Colonel Durnford's troops, who were scouting nearby hills, ran into the left horn of the Zulu attack and retreated to a dried-out riverbed and took up firing positions. Until noon, with the aid of the Royal Artillery, the British successfully managed to pin down the Zulu centre with devastating volley fire. However, the intense focus on the Zulu centre left the British flanks vulnerable.
And here's the thing. The Zulu had been using that strategy with the buffalo and the horns for decades. And if the British understood their enemy at all, they should have known that's what was happening. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know. Or maybe they just felt like they had to face the enemy in front of them, and then they would worry about that when it happened, but they fell for it.
Which the Zulu horns were now beginning to exploit. As the battle raged on, Durnford's company began to run desperately low on ammunition, and thus withdrew to the camp, leaving the British right flank exposed in the process. To counter this, Pauline ordered all units to fall back in good order to the camp to concentrate their firepower further. It was at this moment that the battlefield was plunged into darkness due to a solar eclipse.
Wow.
Seizing the opportunity, the Zulu left horn and centre rushed forward with tremendous ferocity.
There are certain things you just can never account for, like a solar eclipse happening in the middle of a battle you didn't think was happening that day.
Overrunning the British left flank and bursting into the camp. Terror ensued as desperate hand-to-hand combat erupted in the dim light of the burning tents. As the British troops were driven deeper into the camp, the Zulu right horn appeared from behind Isandlwana mountain to complete its encirclement. Realizing all hope was lost, those who could fled along Fugitives Drift, leaving the less fortunate to their fate. Those who were cut off fought a bitter and bloody last stand in small groups, mostly dying whilst fighting back to back with their comrades in arms. Colonel Durnford himself was killed whilst bravely trying to defend the wagon trail entrance to the camp. Those who made their escape along Fugitives Drift were relentlessly pursued by the overwhelming Zulu force. Famously, Lieutenants Coghill and Melville were cut down on the banks of the Buffalo River whilst trying to protect the Queen's colour, for which they would both go on to be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross.
And for a long time, my understanding is that the Victoria Cross was only awarded to people who were alive, that it wasn't given posthumously, but obviously by this point that's changed.
The battle met its bloody end on the banks of the river, where some 60 men of the 24th, exhausted and demoralized, were slaughtered. Upon returning to the camp, late on the evening of the 22nd, and now with the Zulu army nowhere to be seen, Chelmsford, who had ignored Pauline's pleas to return to the camp during the battle, was left in absolute shock. His arrogance and incompetence had left the mountainside littered with the mutilated corpses of his once proud army. To rub salt in the wound, Chelmsford, who had feared a Zulu attack across the border into Natal, could now see the mission station at Rorke's Drift ablaze in the night sky. But that is a story for another episode.
So you can see there, I mean, the British inflicted some pretty heavy casualties, but considering how they were armed versus how the Zulu were armed, pretty even in the end, really. So I guess that's probably the end of this. Yeah, there you go. So there's his sources. Well done. I really enjoyed that. We'll have to check out some more of his stuff down the road. In the meantime, check out his channel if you would. And I'll throw up the link to yesterday's video about the Battle of Rorke's Drift if you didn't already see that. And I did a full series, reaction series to Extra Histories series on the Zulu Kingdom. If you want to learn more about the history of that kingdom leading up to this point, you can check that out as well on the screen. Thanks for watching.